We are in our new, it's not new anymore, is it? We are in a series called His Story, which is a play on words for those of you who are not smart enough to pick up on it, of the word history. So it's a history walk through the whole Bible, but we're focusing on the whole Bible as it is telling us the gospel story, or His story, or Jesus' story. You guys have learned a lot so far? You enjoying it? Good. Because we're going to be here for at least 66 weeks, right? Because there's 66 books in the Bible. And what we're doing is every week we go through one book of the Bible. I try to craft a sermon that gives us the big overview highlights of the gospel message as it is delivered in the book itself, right? And of course, at the same time, teaching us the history of what's going on there. So we've been traveling through the Bible. We've looked at Genesis, and then we looked at Exodus, and then we looked at Leviticus. And I have that tilted up on its side because it's a shorter book, and it's not much of a story as much as it is other details. Then we have Numbers, and then Deuteronomy, same thing, shorter book written kind of in between these stories. Then we looked at 1st and 2nd Samuel, which is one complete book, but we looked at it in sections. And then now we are in 1st and 2nd Kings, which again is really just one book, one scroll, if you will, but it's been divided into two separate sections for us in our Bible. And because there's so many stories in these 4 books, my sermons are not one sermon per book. It's more like 2 per book, so 4 per big book, if that makes sense. All right, so I always tell you where we are in the Bible. That's where we are. Now I'm going to tell you where we are on the map, and this is where we are on the map. We are near the Jordan River in Jerusalem. Now, I thought it would be a good idea for me to go back to this, since it's been a while since I've told this story. You might remember when we started Genesis, I told you that this is the whole story of the Bible right here on this map. And so what happened in this map was that we believe that creation started somewhere around here, and then as they started to fall away from God, they came further down here until we eventually meet a person named, what was his name? Abraham, and he was found in the city of Ur. God called him and said, I want you to go back. Remember the Tower of Babel was here? I'm going to lead you back to this promised land in Jerusalem. So he goes to Jerusalem, and he's there. And while he's there, eventually they have children. They have 12 children. One of them becomes Joseph, right? Joseph, the coat of many colors, was sold into slavery into Egypt. And while he was in Egypt, there was all the Jews, the famine came, and then all the Jews ended up moving to Egypt during the famine, and then becoming slaves for how many years? 400 years. And then eventually God rose up Moses, who led them out of Egypt, and that book is called Exodus, which means exit, or to get out. And so they go through the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, where they get the covenant, the 10 Commandments, and then they also make 2 golden calves, remember, or one golden calf, excuse me. They make one golden calf, very upset about this. And so so God says they're going to wander in the wilderness, and they wandered in the wilderness for many, many years, until eventually they went and crossed the Jordan River and attacked Jericho. Now we're in the book of Numbers, okay? We're in the book of Joshua, excuse me. And then, this was the book of Numbers, the book of Joshua. Then from there, they took over that land, and they started to create this as their promised land, right? That's their new promised land right there. Let me make it a different color. This is the new promised land. And during that time, there were judges that sort of kind of ruled. The judges would, like Samson and Gideon and all them, they would kill the bad guys that were coming in and repressing the Jews. And what was happening is that God told them, when you enter into this promised land, you're supposed to eliminate the people that are there because they worship foreign gods, they sacrifice children, they're just false idols, and we don't want you coming out of Egypt, becoming my people, letting this stuff seep into your life. Does that make, you know what I'm talking about? Idolatry is the typical term. And so because they didn't actually get rid of all those people, that idolatry can continue to come in. And when it would happen, God would bring in some sort of king of another nation, the Philistines, right? The mosquito bites, the parasites, remember all those. And they would come in and they would suppress them or repress them and require taxes. And that's where we get Gideon, and all these would lead the people out. Then eventually they said, you know what, maybe if we had a king, this would stop happening to us. So we want a king, God. And God says, I'm your king. You're supposed to let me be your king. But fine, you want a king? I'll give you a king, which we talked about then. God often gives us what we want, even when we shouldn't want it, right? Just so that we can learn. And we do that to our kids, right? You want it? Fine. Hey, here you go. Take it. And then Saul became the first king. Saul started not, again, killing these people, but started adapting their ways. And then God said, I'm taking the kingdom from you, giving it to David. And David became a man after God's own heart. And we looked at that for several weeks. It's a good story. David was now leading all of this place here as the kingdom of David. And it was great. It was awesome. It was not awesome, though, because David still was a sinner, right? David still killed Uriah, slept with Bathsheba, had, made lots of mistakes. And so eventually God said, I will make a promise with you. A king will rise from your childhood, from your loins, Jesus, of course, many years from now, and he will reign forever and ever and ever, okay? But until then, you've got these other sons, Solomon and Absalom and all them, and they're not really going to be that. They're not going to be the king that reigns forever. And then we looked at, last week, we looked at 1 Kings, and we looked at Solomon. Solomon was here. And I mentioned before that what happened was eventually the Jewish nation got divided into two kingdoms, north and south, Judah and Jerusalem. And then we have these two kings that run around. And we looked at some of them last week, Jeroboam, you might remember, and Rehoboam and all of these. And we'll look at them more when we get to the book of Chronicles, because if you've read, raise your hand if you read 1st and 2nd Kings over the last couple of weeks, because you knew we were going to be talking about it. Look, stickers for you, all of you. And you would recognize that often when it happens, it says, and anything more that you might want to know about King Ahab or King, Rahab, is it not written in the Chronicles of the Kings? Do you remember hearing that? If you didn't nod, then I knew you were lying about reading 1st and 2nd Kings, because it says it over and over and over again, right? If anything else you want to know about the Kings, is it not written in the Chronicles? And so you get to the Chronicles, and we'll get more of that next week. Well, it'll be a couple weeks from now, okay? So today, we're going to continue that series of 1st Kings. So I mentioned to you last week that it was broken up into 3 sections. The first section is all about King Solomon, and we learned about some of the things he was good at, and he was very wise, and everyone knows that about Solomon. He wrote Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. But he was also very sinful, and he took on, how many wives was it? 700 wives. You remembered. You remembered the exact number. Yeah, it is unbelievable, right? I can't even imagine having 700 wives and concubines, 300 concubines, so he had 1,000 women that he had to take care of. And those women, the Bible tells us, started to steal his heart towards their gods, towards their idols, Baal and Asherah. Asherah, for the Ashereth, was a female goddess. And so the kingdom continued to get divided, and God allowed this division because of this idolatry. And what we saw last week when we move into the next section of the divided kingdom is that every king that becomes king of Judah or Jerusalem goes further and further down that path of adopting these idols, Baal and Ashereth, okay? And God is constantly saying, no, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And when you read the book, it says he did worse than his father David. He did worse than his father Solomon. He did worse than his father Jeroboam. And so they're just getting worse and worse and worse. These are the stories that we talked about last week. I'm going to skip through them. Let me, because I didn't finish my sermon last week because we had communion. So where was I? Where did I leave off? I left off here. I remember. So Ahab, the last king that we get to in 1 Kings was Ahab. And remember I told you Ahab was married to a woman whose name was Jezebel. Famous name. You don't want to name your daughter Jezebel. She's an evil woman. And she wanted to kill all of God's prophets. So she's killing God's prophets, and these prophets are being run off, and they're hiding in caves, or they're dead, or they're dying. And she killed a lot of God's prophets. Can you imagine? And so we get to this next section of the book. Before we go there, let me just read this. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. And that's the lie that we keep saying. More than all before them. More than all before them. And what specifically is the evil? Bringing in this false god worship into Jerusalem, into Judah. Okay? So then we get to this last section, and this last section is dedicated to Elijah. And I mentioned last week briefly, today we're going to talk about Elijah. Elijah, raise your hand if you know the name Elijah. Okay, so he's a very famous prophet, right? We know a lot about Elijah. Jesus talks about Elijah. John the Baptist is said to be Elijah, right? So Elijah is a huge name in the Bible. And what I think is fascinating is he just shows up in chapter 17, just shows up. And the author kind of writes of him as if we're supposed to already know who he is. And I'll show you. Look at 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. It says, now Elijah said to Ahab, well, okay, wait, no, this isn't the text. Let me find it in the Bible. You have to go with me. 1 Kings 17. 1 Kings, I'm going to read it from this Bible right here, which I got from back there. It says, now Elijah, the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab. That's what it literally says. I made it a little shorter to fit on the screen. So that's it. That's how it starts off. So we get all that stuff that I just told you, and then we said, now Elijah, the son of so-and-so, said to Ahab. Who's Elijah? We haven't met him yet, right? But now we're meeting him. And what did he say? As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. So he goes to King Ahab, who's married to Jezebel, who's killing the prophets, right? Elijah shows up and says, hey, dude, God sent me to tell you there's not going to be any rain. There's going to be a drought. And it's going to be so bad there's not even going to be any dew, okay? No dew. So we're all going to suffer. And it's because of your wife, and it's because of your fact that you're worshiping other gods, okay? And so then Elijah tells Ahab, let's do something. He says, why don't you gather up all your worshiping, your priests, the priests of the Baal and the priest of Ashereth, gather them and bring them onto the mountain. And we learn at this point that there are 450 priests to Baal, and there are 400 priests to Ashereth, okay? Or priestesses. and all of God's priests or prophets are all in hiding because of the wanted sign that's on their life. So Elijah shows up, who is a prophet, and says, there's going to be a famine, and what I'd like for you to do, Ahab, is gather up all these prophets and let's go to Mount Carmel, which is in Waco, Texas. I'm just kidding. Y'all know I used to live in Waco, Texas? And I graduated high school in 1997, and that was the year of the Waco. What does that mean? We ain't coming out. No, but it was my senior year, and a lot of times my friends would, because you were allowed to, in your senior year, you're allowed to drive at lunchtime and go get lunch, like at, Taco Bell or whatever. And a lot of my friends would go to the standoff and just be a part of the standoff. Because there was a crowd of people that were just watching. I never went. But whenever I sent all my senior invitations to my graduation, I said, sorry, I haven't written you in so long. I've been in a compound. No one thought that was funny. But that's Mount Carmel. That was Mount Carmel. Anyway, so Mount Carmel, Elijah shows up. He tells Ahab to bring all these priests. So there's 450 priests of Baal. And he's looking at these, before he does this, he turns to all the people there, right? Now, the priest is for the people, right? He's there to teach the people. And he tells the people, and I love this verse. He says to these people, he's talking to all of them, and he says, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Let me just say this in English. How long will you waver, another way it is written, between two opinions? Either worship God or worship Baal, but stop trying to do both. Pick one, right? Pick one. You're trying to have your cake. Why do they say that? He wants his cake and eat it too. Look, of course I want to eat it too. Where's that come from? I said that to my kids the other day. Well, son, you just want your cake and eat it too. And he's like, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. But my mom used to say it, and it made sense to me, so it should make sense to you. You're a child. You want to be able to use God when he works and use Baal when you think he works. And Elijah says, you need to pick one. And here's a simple litmus test, people. Either if God is the one you want, then go with God. If not, then go with Baal, right? Just pick one. For crying out loud. You get to pick. But you have to pick one. And what did the people do? The people did not answer him a word. Why? Yeah, they're scared. They want their cake and eat it too, right? They want to be able to worship God when that works, and they want to be able to and by the way, Ashereth was a goddess, and it was a sexual kind of a religion, okay? There were temple prostitutes. So, yeah, that sounds fun, right? So we worship God, and we do this for fun as well. And you know what? Maybe these things work whenever we need these things. This God will give us what we want when this God won't. It's like a kid who has two parents that are divorced. You know what I'm talking about? They ask Mom, can I have, I don't know, what, a new phone? She's like, no, you can have a new phone. Well, then I'll just ask, what does she say? I'll just ask Dad. And Dad will give it to me to make you mad. And so these people are playing this game with God and with Baal. So, and this is a fun story. Judy told me today this is her favorite story, so I hope we tell it well. Elijah says, gather these 450, let's just start with Baal, okay? Gather the 450 priests of Baal and bring them to me. And he's standing in front of these 450 priests of Baal, and he says, this is what we're going to do. Since there's 450 of you and there's only one of me, why don't you go get two big cows, and bring them here. You'll take one and sacrifice it to your God, cut it up into pieces, go ahead and build an altar, put the pieces of that cow on the altar, and then I'll do the same. I'll build an altar to my God, and we'll cut up the cow all by myself, and we'll put it on the altar. And then what we'll do is we'll call for your God to light the thing on fire, right? To make the thing burn by itself from heaven. And I'll call on my God to do that. And whoever's God actually burns his own sacrifice is the true God. Deal? And the 450 priests said, we got this. We're going to beat you. I loved it because it's like, remember when you were in high school and you get in a fight with someone, you say, hey, I'm going to meet you at the bicycle racks. Do you remember that? Meet you at the bicycle racks after school. What does that mean? It means I'm going to kick your butt. You bring your friends and I'll bring my friends and we'll meet at the bike racks. Did anyone ever say that? Do you guys do that in Owensville, or is that just a Texas thing? Okay. Parking lot? The pool? So that way afterwards you can all get in the pool and wash off the blood. Oh, okay. It was off school property. Well, that's basically what Elijah's doing here. Let's go meet at the pool parking lot. And you bring your cow, I'll bring my cow. And we'll see whose God shows up. So the 450 priests of Baal, they do just that. They build their altar. They cut this cow into its quarter pieces and stick it on top of the altar. And then the Bible literally says, and you can read it in chapter 17 there, that they start chanting to their God, right? I don't know what they're doing, but I'm imagining some sort of cinematic movie, right? They're very dark. They got black and red hoods, horns, God, God, God. And they're trying to get God to burn the altar, and nothing happens. So then they take it up a notch, and they get a little crazier. Maybe they're dancing. Maybe they're spinning. Maybe they're speaking in some sort of Babel language, right? And that doesn't work. And then they start taking knives and cutting themselves. And the Bible says, as was their custom. So part of their worship experience would be to cut themselves and to draw their own blood to get God's attention. And they're dancing around and they're babbling and they're cutting and like, you can imagine the scene, right? You can imagine it as being very silly if you want to go in that direction, or you can imagine it as being very dark and creepy if you were thinking of it being on Netflix, right? That's the way I like to imagine it, very dark and creepy. Something from Vikings or something. God, bring us the fire. And it says that around noon, so like 4 or 5 hours later, no fire, right? You really can't kick it up more a notch, right? Did I say that wrong? Yes, I did. You really can't kick it up more a notch. That's the new way of saying it, just so that you know. You can't kick it up a notch any more than that. How about that? They've already cut them. What are they going to do? Cut deeper? Start sacrificing themselves so they can't take it any further. And so Elijah starts poking at them and saying, maybe your God can't hear you. Maybe you should talk louder. Maybe you should scream louder. And then he would say, maybe he's on vacation. Maybe you need to check your email. Maybe there was a bounce back email saying, sorry, I'll be out of the office for the next 2 weeks. Go check that. And he's making fun of them. And they're like, getting mad at him. And he says, maybe he's taking a nap. Maybe you need to just speak a little, you wake him up. My favorite one is like, maybe he's using the bathroom. Elijah literally says that. I'm not saying this to be funny. It's in the Bible, although it is funny, right? The Bible is great. I love it. Maybe he's using the bathroom. And these Baal worshipers are like, shut up, Elijah. Leave our God alone. Right? And they're just like exhausted at this point. They've been doing this all day long and nothing's happening. And it's great for our team, right? Okay, but then Elijah says, all right, my turn. So the Bible says that there was an altar there that had been torn down. It was God's altar from before. And so he rebuilds it with 12 stones. You know what that means. We've seen this before. He rebuilds the altar with 12 stones. He digs a trench around it, a deep trench around it, and he cuts up the bull and he puts it on top of the wood that was there. And again, this is something that's pretty amazing to me. When you think of a prophet, he's not this skinny little man who's cutting a bull. I mean, how do you cut a bull by yourself? You know what I'm saying? Without a laser gun. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know, he's sawing it. I don't know what he's doing, but he cuts this thing up, he puts it on the altar, and then he says to the servants around, he's saying, I want you to get me 4 earthen vessels full of water, and then come over here and dump it on the bull and the wood and the altar. And they say, okay, what is that about? And so they get full big earthen vessel jars of water and dump it all over there. And he goes, go do it again. Go get 4 more. Okay, so they go get 4 more, and they dump it all over it again. And he's like, go get it. Just do it a 3rd time. This is the Bible. I mean, you can read it. It's so cool. They do it a 3rd time, and it says the water is running down the bull, running down the wood, running down the altar, filling the trench full of water, which is now mixed with blood and water and everything. And what is he doing? He's taunting them even more. He's like, your God couldn't make a fire. He's in the bathroom and you guys are cutting yourselves. My God's going to do it, but before I ask him to do it, I'm going to make it even harder for him. I'm going to make it wet wood. Right? I think of it like, like when I was a kid, there was magicians and they would like put themselves in a straitjacket and then go into a closet and then come back out of the closet, out of the straitjacket, and then you'd be like, ooh, how did you do it? How would we know? You were in there in a closet. You know what I mean? And then so they'd kick it up a notch and they'd say, no, I'm going to put myself in handcuffs and then in a straitjacket and then in a safe with the safe locked, and then we're going to throw the safe. We're going to put chains around the safe, put another lock on, and then we're going to throw the safe in the ocean and it's going to float to the bottom of the sea, and then I'm going to escape, right? So, what's next, right? Have you seen magicians like that? They're still doing it today. The next one is like, I'm going to go on a balloon, fly up to the heavens, and then escape and come down, or whatever. It's crazy stuff. They always got to kick it up a notch. Well, that's kind of what I'm imagining here. Elijah just kicks it up a notch. And then he does this. He quietly says, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their face and said, here's what they said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Ooh, that's a good story, is it not? Wow. You forgot that our God does do miracles, right? He parted the Red Sea. He destroyed Jericho, right? He gave you the manna. He gave you the quail. He gave you the water from the rock, right? You forgot that our God is real and he does miracles. And so now you've been reminded. And they fell and said, oh, wow, how silly are we? So then Elijah says, how about we get rid of these 450 Baal priests? And so they gather them and torture them, and not torture them, kill them, execute them. They're gone. And then he tells the people, right, now you can choose, right? Who are you going to choose? Who are you going to choose? And the people are the one who gathered them. And then a strange thing happens. You would think, well, let me just insert a little sermon here if I can. Maybe I don't have to because some of you guys are so smart. You've already done this. But it's my job to make sure that you did do it, and that is this. Did you forget that our God is the God who does miracles? Did you forget? Did you forget that he's the one who really does part seas? and brings down quail from heaven and fire from heaven. And if you, like me, we sometimes forget. We think prayer does work, right? Coming to God does work. He is the source. He is our rock. He is our truth. Maybe you do need more vitamin D, right? Maybe you can go watch a YouTube video that says, here's your health problem, go eat more vitamin D, and you can try the vitamin D. But and that's a good thing. But you know what? Did you go to God? Right? What about God? What does God have to say about it? And so we sometimes, it's hard to answer this question because it's kind of meta, but are we wavering between two views? God and the world? And we need to choose. Amen? That would be my sermon if you guys were ready to hear it. Now, the next thing that happens is kind of interesting. You would think that Elijah is going to be on top of the world. He just won the UFC, right? And but instead, he goes up onto a mountain, and he's kind of still. He's quiet, and he's praying for rain. And he's asking one of his servants to go and see if it's going to rain, because now that this battle has been won, we need to let it rain because people are dying. And so eventually, the story. You've heard the story before. It starts off with this really small cloud, and then he goes and he tells Ahab that it's going to rain. Interesting little story. I don't quite have a sermon for it, but it says that once Elijah realized that there was going to be rain, it says that he girded up his robe and he ran ahead of King Ahab to Jezreel. And King Ahab was on chariots and horses. I think it was very interesting, right? He just ran ahead of him. Like, why the Bible puts that in there? He had the superpower of like the Flash. That's all it says about that. Interesting. And then Ahab gets home and tells his wife what had happened on Mount Carmel, and she gets really mad and starts even upgrading her execution plans, and she's definitely trying to kill him. So he goes and he hides in a cave, and he's very depressed. The Bible says he's putting his hand between his legs, and he's just really down. And the angel of the Lord comes to him and says, "Why are you so down?" And he says, "She's trying to kill all the prophets. I'm the only one left, and I'm going to die." And then he said, "I want you to go to this cave. I want you to sit inside of it. God is going to show himself to you. God is going to reveal himself to you." And so Elijah goes into this cave, waiting for God to reveal himself to you. What do you remember in our story so far about God revealing himself to characters on mountainsides? Does that sound familiar? You might remember Moses up on the mountain. He would speak to him. His face would shine. He'd bring down the commandments. At one point, Moses said, "I want to see your glory." And God said, "You cannot, or you will die. However, I will pass by you, and I will cover you, and you will see my back." Right? Remember that? And Moses was able to do that. Now God is saying to Elijah, "You go sit inside this mouth of this cave, and then I will reveal myself to you." And we're thinking, wait, has he changed the rules? Right? Is Elijah going to get to see him? And then it's a beautiful story. It says that Elijah was in the cave, and an earthquake came. You know what an earthquake is, right? An earthquake came, and you're in a mountain. That's not a good place to be. But it says, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then a strong, heavy wind came, but the Lord was not in the wind. And then a fire came. I don't know, was fire just burning along the side of the mountain? But God was not in the fire. And then a small voice came, and God was in the voice. So Elijah came to the mouth of the cave to meet God, and God spoke to him. Beautiful story, is it not? You're probably wondering what God said to him. You'll have to read it. You'll have to read it. But here's the story in 19. And God said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces and the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in that wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake." I got the order a little wrong in my storytelling there. "But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And then after the fire, a sound of a low whisper." What is it all about, Mike? Why are you telling us all this? I'm not telling you. God's telling you. It's in the Bible. It's in the end of the book of 1 Kings. What's it all about? Well, a couple things. As we look at this whole story, we see that God is telling us this story. And the two things that we've been consistently saying is that one thing that he's telling us is that we want a king, right? We want a king. And Solomon, although he's wise, he's not faithful, so he's really not the king we need. And the kings that have come up after Solomon, They ruled, sure, but they could not change hearts. Some of them were good, but most of them were bad. They couldn't change their hearts. Elijah finally came. He spoke the truth, but he still couldn't save the nation because the people would still run after their own gods. So 1 Kings, I said last week, leaves us wanting a king who will rule wisely, obey perfectly, and never turn his heart away from the Father like David did. And we're waiting for that person, right? And his name is Jesus. Now, here's where the story gets really cool, in my opinion. When Jesus walked on the earth, a couple things happened. One thing happened is that he literally tells us that John the Baptist is Elijah, right? Do you remember that? So there's this connection there. And then Jesus goes on top of the mountain, and when he's on top of the mountain with his chosen disciples, we have what's called the Transfiguration. Remember that? Jesus appears all in white, and there are two men beside him. Do you remember who those two men are? Moses and Elijah. And here we see, as we've been trekking through this Bible story, that Moses was on a mountain requesting to see God's glory, and Elijah is on a mountain requesting to see God's glory, and they both, in a sense, saw it more than you and I did, right? And then they get reappeared again in Jesus' transfiguration, tying this all together. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. And what is it saying? I think it's saying a couple things. One thing that I want to say that it says is that, first of all, we do waver between two opinions. It's very easy for us to do. We're humans. And the one opinion that we should go to God, right? Not to the world and the other gods. This one is, well, it's kind of quiet and kind of slow, and we have to be patient with it. Would you agree with that as an illustration of the life of a Christian? Quiet, slow, consistent, patience, trust, humility, right? And then the world's way is like try harder, go faster, get more, right? And it's louder maybe. And this one is like, woo, we can cheerlead your way into this one. Just come on, guys, let's do it, right? And this one is quiet. When the Baals tried to bring their God fire down, oh, come on, we can do it. It's chaotic. But God is like, Elijah's like, Lord, show these people that you're God. Remind them. And then God does it, right? And it's God that does it, not Elijah and his jumping up and down, screaming and shouting. I wrestled with this a lot in my youth when I was running with the charismatic group. I ran with the charismatic group for 2 years. I wanted to be charismatic, right? I asked God, please give me the gift of speaking in tongues. I never got that gift. I'm not saying that if you have the gift, it's not real. I'm just saying I never got it. And I was mad about that. And what I realized is that most of the Bible is not screaming and hyper. It's just praying to God and being consistent and listening. And this story about Elijah is him listening. And it even extends it even further. When he listens, God himself isn't loud, right? Not a loud earthquake, not a loud fire, not a loud wind, but a small whisper. And so he's asking you to be calm or be still and know that I am God. Listen to me. It's quiet. It's still. There's another story I failed to tell this morning, didn't have time, about Elijah healing a young boy. There was a drought, right? So everyone was dying, and this boy died, and Elijah was there, and the mother said, why did you let my son die? And Elijah prayed for many days, and it said he literally outstretched himself on top of the boy. It's kind of interesting. And he's just praying and praying and praying for days, and the boy raises from the dead. Very interesting story. So why am I saying all this? Well, because the world and Baal, if you will, their way is going to be jump up and down, scream, shout, get excited, spend more, do more, get shinier, glitterier, whatever. I don't know how to talk. Glitter, more glitter, okay? Glitter and glamour, glitterier. I don't even know what word I was trying to say. Sparklier. I can't even say that word anymore. I spend too much time with my kids. They don't say things right, and then now I don't say things right. And then the God, our God's way is the opposite. It's not louder, glitterier, right? It's consistent, calm, humble, trust. And that's what we're going to see even when Jesus comes, right? It's beautiful. That's all I have for today. We will look at the rest of the story next week. Let's pray together. Dear God in heaven, I want to thank you so much for teaching us that you are good, that you are God, that you love us, that you care for us, that you know us, and you know what we need even before we ask it. We don't have to jump up and down and shout and scream to get your attention. We just need to be still and know that you are God. We just need to come to you, prostrate ourselves humbly, and trust in you, and not try other glitterier things. We just come to you, Lord. I pray, Lord, that even this week you will teach us to see you moving and active in our quiet lives. And you'll teach us to be quiet and still and trust in you. I'm thinking of several people in our church family who need prayer this week. At the moment, their life is chaotic enough. They're struggling with cancer, or they're struggling with financial issues or marriage issues. I want to think again of Rachel, who's going tomorrow to get a test, and she's worried that test may say cancer. And that's how scary is it this weekend, knowing that tomorrow you are going to get a test. And so I ask again, Lord, that in your still, calm, quiet, godly nature, that you would still her heart and still anyone else's heart here who's struggling with those same kinds of things, forgetting perhaps that you are the God of miracles, that you are a good God. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Glitterer.